sea. The river is flowing, flowing and flowing. The river is flowing down to the sea. Mama, carry me, child, ever always be. Mama, carry me down to the sea. The river is flowing, flowing and flowing. The river is flowing down to the sea.
During the 1980s, the Cold War escalated to a height not seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Public fears of nuclear annihilation were very real. In a small village in southwest Wales, a few women took their local protest to an international level. This is a story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thalia Campbell, artist and banner maker, was one of the original marchers. She became the coordinator of the sculpture project. The sculpture started with small donations. It became real when given the Transport and General Workers Union Peace Prize. For 10 years, Thalia consulted with women all around the world.
Break the nuclear chain. Stand up.
In Malta, over 3 months, Anton Ajus creates the life-size clay original, which is made into a plaster cast to be shipped to the foundry in Wales.
Stand up, women, make your choice. Create a world without nuclear threat.
Many women artists were approached over the 10 years who had interesting ideas to be executed in wood, fiberglass or concrete. Few had the technical training to carry the work in bronze to create a durable public monument. One woman sculptor, famous for her work making national monuments, offered to make the sculpture for cost price, but her husband, worrying for her career, vetoed it. Anton Ajus freely agreed to make the sculpture without cost for the cause of peace. The Greenham Marcher was to be situated where it all started, outside Cardiff City Hall. This film is about the monument, but more importantly about the movement which created it.
So I was running around saying to other women I knew, like, it's a really good idea, why don't we do this, you know, and getting sort of rather offhand kind of responses, you know, they sort of, yes, Anne, but well, it's a lot of work, or yes, but you know, I'm busy, or couldn't do it here, or whatever, until I contacted Carmen.
Both Anne and I were young mothers, so we felt we didn't have much of a voice, and we didn't have much of a voice back in those days either, and so it was basically our way of saying what we felt as mothers of young children, the fears we had.
And I was already involved in anti-nuclear campaigning, really. We started off round here involved in campaigning against nuclear power because they were going to dump nuclear waste in Wales. We switched to campaigning about nuclear weapons when the arms race, with the proposed sighting of Cruise, it seemed to be ratcheting up a notch. And everybody seemed to suddenly start talking and thinking about nuclear war as being almost inevitable.
I had this continual nightmare that he was in school, he just started school, and I was at home, and it's quite a walk from his school, and you'd have this 3-minute warning, and I wouldn't get there. And that used to I'd wake up in tears.
When the government actually believes its own idiocies and starts issuing you with sensible advice about what to do when nuclear bombs fall, you think, well, what's going on here, you know?
With cruise missiles being flown into Greenham soon, Anne Carmen and 2 others decided to organise the march.
The conception of the march for me was at Brawdy in West Wales, a military base, where we had a CND rally, where we had only men speakers, 12 of them. We had clergy, we had politicians, and we had scientists. And all the women were getting so fed up and about to jump up and speak, and Anne jumped up spontaneously and spoke about babies and giving birth and being pregnant and washing nappies, only to see everything destroyed in war. I knew Anne was going to do something, so I was looking out for it, and I took alternative magazines and I read magazines, and when I saw the march I thought, yes, I must go on that.
We organised a march to Greenham Common by women, and we guessed that we might get 50. We didn't have any money to publicise it. We couldn't take out adverts in newspapers or anything, but we were very keen that we'd get women outside the peace movement, as well as obviously publicising it within the peace movement. So we put we had a couple of little editorial pieces, you know, we couldn't pay for them obviously, in magazines like Cosmopolitan.
But we talked on the way up. We said, what if we're the only two there? What do we do? Do we go home and pretend it hasn't happened, or do we carry on and walk on our own?
On August 27th, 1981, 36 women, 4 babies in pushchairs and 6 men gathered outside City Hall, Cardiff, to walk the 110 miles to Newbury in Berkshire.
Well, I arrived in Cardiff at the Quaker Hall. I didn't know anybody except Anne, and there were people of all ages, and we didn't know each other, and we started to talk to each other. We got to know each other as we walked, and slowly we became a tribe. We slept in village halls together, we walked together all day, we were 24 hours in each other's company, and we were working out our feminism, we were working out about our actions for peace, we were working about what non-violence was all about, we were working our ethos out on the way.
We had a pamphlet of a deformed child that had been born after the Hiroshima bombing, so how radiation, this is the real fear, this is the real truth of nuclear weapons. So we had this as a small pamphlet, and we were going to collect petition names on the way, and we were going to get there, give our petition in, say our little bit, and come home.
We thought, this is quite a sort of big thing, you know, walking 110 miles and that group of women. Surely they won't ignore this, but they did. And because we were ignored, we had to do more. Liney and Lynn, the other, you know, the two who helped us organise it, I mean, said, well, we better do what the suffragettes did, because they were ignored. They were asking for the vote. Well, it seems like obviously sensible thing, you know, that's not unreasonable. But they were dismissed and ignored, so they chained themselves up to the House of Parliament, you know. So they said, well, why don't we chain ourselves to Greenham when we get there? This suggestion had a very mixed reception amongst the women on the march.
And people were very scared, very worried about it, because these were just like, we were just mums, you know, grandmas. None of us had broken the law, done anything like this, you know. There was no idea of building a camp or, you know, staying for weeks, just doing that initial protest. It was brought up the idea of, we're going to have to do something more, because otherwise we've wasted all these days and the effort and the goodwill of many people on the way who provided us with excellent accommodation and fantastic food and entertainment.
Every night, the women on the march held a meeting. From this grew a new way of working together.
We just went round and said each in turn what she thought, with no comment. So everybody spoke. Everybody had to speak. There was none of this kind of, the people who had views said them, and most people shut up and sat there thinking their thoughts privately, which is what happens in meetings, you know. There was none of that. Everybody spoke, but nobody said, hey, no, I don't agree with that, whatever. There was no comment, you know, you just spoke in turn.
I wasn't very confident, and in other meetings you'd go along and listen to people talking who were experts talking about nuclear weapons or cruise missiles and so on. And it was different because it was mothers with young children, and they were just talking about their feelings. And I thought, well, I can do that because my ideas and my feelings are just as valid as theirs, and that's how it made me feel. It just made me feel as though I could do it. I could talk about nuclear weapons. I could talk about it not just to them but to other people too, because everything they were saying was everything that I felt, but not things that you often heard said in public meetings.
But I think it was Eunice, one of the old, if not the oldest woman, local Welsh woman, who said, you know, we've just got to do it. We've got to make our voice heard. And then it turned, and then it got down to, basic organisation of who was going to do it, what we were going to do, who was going to read the piece we'd written, who was going to go to the local shop and buy chains.
I remember going with Liney into a hardware shop in Marlborough and buying chains. It was hilarious. Because we didn't have any money or anything. we could only buy tiny padlocks because we couldn't afford big ones. And so that morning when we got to Newbury, at 7:30 in the morning, 4 women set off, all deadly secret and everything, to chain themselves up to the base. Women sort of belt up to the fence, lovely morning, 1 policeman on the gate, standing there, like Mr. Plod, you know, Dixon and Dock Green sort of stuff, you know, and the women sort of charge up to the fence and get chained up. He sort of turns around and he says to them, "You're early." He even spoke with the local Berkshire accent. "You're early." We knew it. We knew it. They had advance warning. even though we've kept it, only a dozen people know what's happening. And we knew it, yeah. You know, any minute, Nino, you know, right, police arrive, you know, and so on. I said, "What do you mean we're early?" He said, "Well," he said, "cleaners don't usually get here till 8 o'clock. It's only 7:30. Eunice says, "Cleaners? We're not your cleaners, man. We've chained ourselves to the gate. We've chained ourselves to your fence." And he sort of strolls out and said, "Oh, so you have. What have you done that for then?"
And then a really bizarre thing started then. Another car drew up, and these women from an Irish keening association, something to do with peace and whatever else, they turned up as well, and they started keening the Irish way. So there's all this chaos, and I'm trying to be, you know, serious and read my bit, but I'm apparently a cleaner, you know, and there's all these women behind me making this awful noise. So it wasn't a very dramatic start, really, but quite pure comedy, actually. I think we saw the commander of the base called us in. That's right, we asked for a public debate. We were going to go away if we had a public debate. There had to be a 3-way debate between governments and people and the different peoples of the countries that this affected. So basically, if they'd have given us that, which is quite a common thing today, to have debates on television, we'd have gone home because we were so law-abiding.
People from the press turned up, and one of them said, "Oh right, well, they contacted the Ministry of Defence, I think, and said, well, they said nothing to do with us. It's common land. They can stay there as long as they like. We're not going to do anything." The women stayed chained up. Oh, we started taking it in turns then to be chained up. We lit a fire. We stayed. We had to stay. We had to stay the night. Yeah, this was the end of our march. We'd all assumed we'd be going home that evening. We had to stay the night out in the open. It was all right. It was fine weather. We had sleeping bags because we'd been sleeping on floors all the way anyway. So local people, I think, from Newbury, sympathisers, you know, sort of cooked us some food that evening and brought it along. And then we had to stay another day and another night and another night and another night and another night, you know. So local people from Newbury brought us more food and lent us tents, and then some of us sort of went home down the M4 and came back with tents and pots and pans and things, blankets and, you know. And gradually it just turned into a kind of encampment. It was very difficult. I mean, I found it immensely difficult because I had 2 very young children at home. Liney had 2 young children. A lot of us had young children. Helen John was very committed to staying. I mean, after 2 weeks, we held a meeting. The older women and some of the younger ones, the ones, in other words, whose families were grown up, or the ones who had less commitments, less home commitments, the ones who could stay, about half a dozen of them said, "Well, look, we're happy to stay, you know, and the rest of you just get as much damn support as you can, you know, we'll stay here, we want to stay," which was quite a relief for me because I felt really torn. I mean, I didn't want it to die, I didn't want it to fail, and we just organised as much support as we could.
This sculpture tells the untold story of the women who gave birth to the Greenham Common Peace Camp. The sculpture was made over a year and went through various stages: clay, a mould made in plaster, from this mould the plaster cast. The finished plaster was shipped from Malta to the M&B foundry in Narberth, Wales.
This is Anton, all the way from Malta.
The making of the sculpture had its technical problems. The unusually hot weather in May had distorted the wax stage.
What I've got, Anton, is all your wax is inside moulds at the moment because of the heat. Okay.
I see. No, I think, you know.
So what he has to do for
No,
you,
you
take
just will have to
open
take
them
them,
up.
open them, you
Yes.
know. Oh, that's a lot of work.
My
But
gosh, there is.
fill them. No, I think today we came for nothing.
The process of making the sculpture paralleled the march and echoed the issues and problems that later split the movement.
Yeah, the decision for Greenham to become a women's only camp was nothing to do with sexism. It was a pragmatic and a practical decision, because police were actually using it at the time. They would aggravate a woman in front of her partner, the man would lose it, and we were going to end up being connected with all sorts of, you know, arrests for breach of the peace in a way that we didn't want it. It wasn't of our choosing. We were being manipulated through it, and that's why the camp became women only.
You know, it wasn't done in those days for mother to leave her children, although as a father can go and fight wars and go abroad and go on the oil drills and all that. They can go for months and things, and no one criticised when Dad goes away. But when Mum came to Greenham Common, it wasn't a thing to do for women to let their family go and leave their family. It wasn't, although Dad was holding the fort while Mum was out protesting.
I had a lot of sympathy with women who chose or felt it necessary to become separatists. A lot of women have got horrific tales of violence and they've experienced a lot of horrors. If those women find it safer and that their best means of expression is in a women-only community, then I believe that they should have a women-only community.
I think it became an area, a little plot of land in Britain, where anybody who had a grudge about anything, especially women, went down to deal with, you know? I really do. And that sometimes the whole business of disarmament was a by issue, you know. It was like, oh yes, disarmament, yes, we'll sort that out. But first of all, I got to sort out my women's problems and whatever else. You know, I had a son and, you know, a partner who was they were involved. Anne had 2 sons and a partner who was involved. I wish I'd been the age I am now when I wouldn't have put up with that sort of bullshit. I really would not have put up with it, because it stopped a lot of local people going down. And it did fuel a lot of bad press, and a lot of the bad press was deserved. Some women behaved with an appalling lack of respect and dignity to people who were turning up for support.
Problems emerging of sort of dominant personalities or whatever emerging. And what tended to happen was that women who didn't like it would go and form another camp at another gate. As they got to know each other, they'd form a new clique, and so women would come up and say, oh, very cliquey, and they'd go and form another one, another gate, you know. And so you had sort of different camps with different kinds of people and different kinds of flavours, really. And so a lot of women with problems did turn up, and at times, you know, the camp was quite overwhelmed by women who had personal problems who would turn up. There were also a lot of women who were lesbian who would go and live at the peace camp, which is, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's kind of inevitable. If I was a sort of young lesbian living in London, I would have gone a lot to the peace camp as well, if it was down the road from me, because it was a good place to be. Of course, it aroused, you know, all the people who sort of prejudiced and everything. That was all they wanted, really. That was what they were looking for, you know. A lot of the young lesbians had incredible kind of solidarity, and and they really supported each other. They were really loyal to each other, and a lot of they made life very difficult for the Americans running the base because they were so brave, really. I mean, you know, they would go in and make incursions into the camp because they had, you know, they just really supported each other.
We did the march and we're down here, and we feel Anne and I were in a difficult situation where you feel a duty, but it's not yours. It's obviously not yours. You don't own it. It's free, but at the same time, people were starting to use it use the place as being theirs, and therefore, this is how you dress, this is how you behave, and your gender as well. But I think the fact it was a women's initiative, yes, it probably helped, I suppose.
And you can't deny the importance of what they were doing, but at the same time, it kind of brought them a bad press, you know, because it was all the press was looking for was images to rouse people's fears and prejudices about, so that instead of thinking about the peace movement or about the issue of the arms race or crews, they would be thinking about Greenham women instead. Would you want them living next door to you, you know, which was completely irrelevant, really.
I was never involved in the sort of inner politics of Greenham. Everyone is Greenham women are everywhere. There's a lot of arguments about this. Some people would argue that you had to be there and you had to be there full time to be a Greenham woman. That was never my view. I was someone who was in complete agreement with what was happening in Greenham. I spent as much time there as possible, partly to replenish my own strength.
The sculpture is one of 3 monuments to the Greenham Common campaigners. Plaques mark the start of the march in 1981 and its journey. There is a memorial garden at the site of the camp itself. From Greenham emerged a more exciting, down-to-earth anti-nuclear protest movement of direct action. The sculpture itself was a piece of direct action. It was not supported by either the Arts Council or the establishment.
I've always felt connected to this march, although I wasn't on it. And it was a wake-up call to women, I believe, and it gave women like myself an opportunity to live out something they'd perhaps always believed, that we were more powerful than we actually seemed to be in their day-to-day lives. And from that point of view, I've always been very grateful for those who carried this initiative forward.
Non-violent direct action has always got to be the way that people protest. You've got to make it easy for people who don't normally protest. I mean, protest is effective when it's when it's unexpected, really, you know, and it has to sort of, in order to get through the kind of Tower of Babel-like sort of cacophony of static and distractions and language and things that people are bombarded with all the time, a message has to come through on a completely different wavelength.
The way that the world came away from the nuclear brink wasn't because of the people were getting more macho on either side or some Thatcher going to war and threatening. The reason the world came to its senses is because of the arguments of the peace movement.
You know, that the fact that it's part of history, that it's considered part of something that ordinary people can do to try and change things, and that you do have a voice at the end of the day.
A model of the statue was put up outside the Assembly's main chamber in the milling area, and I became involved immediately because I raised a point of order on the basis that the milling area, we're told, is meant to be strictly non-political, and citing a model of a figurine of a Greenham Common protester is obviously a blatantly political act. In fact, at the time I said, I asked what the reaction would be if I called for a statue of Mrs Thatcher to be put up in the milling area.
Greenham Women Are Everywhere slogan was true, and it was true for women who'd never been to the Greenham Peace Camp. And it really has created a totally different peace movement, a much, much stronger peace movement, and one that really has its roots in communities throughout Wales and throughout the rest of the world. And I think that it's something that people from other countries looked at and learned from, and just realised how strong the feelings of women were, and women working together for peace. And it's something that'll be remembered forever.
The antics of these people in Greenham Common, their protests were a failure, their views were wrong, and rather than try and celebrate something which was, in my opinion, a illegal protest that failed anyway, we should be looking forward. I think that Di Lloyd had the last word on it. He had something to do with this statue. He said that after it had been removed from the milling area, he was asked where it was, and he said it's safely under lock and key, which I think is probably where all the Greenham Common protesters should be.
It certainly wasn't as simple as, oh, we won. In the end, I mean, to begin with, we didn't. Crews arrived. In the end, I'm sure popular protest, not just us, but the whole peace movement, which we've helped to focus and amplify. But, you know, it was an enormous peace movement, not just in Britain, but in America and in Germany particularly, you know, in America and in Europe. It must have played a part, but you try quantifying that.
The history is written by the winners, and the peace movement has never claimed its role in history as it should have done, and I believe it's up to us to write the history and to keep reshaping that history and to correct the myths that are about. The importance of the statue and the commemoration is to claim for the Greenham Common women and the peace movement our rightful place in history, in that it has sent out ripples of sense against the brutality of the times. And if there's one thing I know about politics, it's never underestimate the stupidity of the world's leaders.
The river is flowing, flowing and flowing, the river is flowing.
But anyway, she's there speaking for us now in a city hall, and it's all happened. Nightmares, dreams, it was like this, up, down, the project. Anyway, she's there now, so she can speak for us as well. And now have a piece of cake.
She goes on and on and on, you can't kill the spirit. She is like a mountain, old and strong. She goes on and on and on, you can't kill the spirit. She is like a mountain, old and strong. She goes on and on and on, you can't kill the spirit. She is like a mountain, old and strong. She goes on and on and on, you can't kill the spirit. She is like a mountain, old